What if the apology you have been waiting for, the one you have rehearsed receiving in your mind 1,000 times, the one you have written letters about, cried about, lost sleep about, what if that apology is never ever coming? What if the person who broke something sacred inside of you will go to their grave completely convinced they did nothing wrong? What if I told you that right now, in this very moment, that is actually the most important piece of information you will ever receive about your own healing? Because here's what I know to be true after years of research, after thousands of conversations with people sitting in the wreckage of their pain, your healing was never supposed to live inside someone else's mouth. It was never supposed to arrive gift-wrapped in the words, "I'm sorry." Your healing is yours, it belongs to you. And today we are going to talk about how to claim it back completely, courageously, and without waiting for permission from the person who hurt you. Stay with me. This conversation will change everything. Full speech, what if the most dangerous prison you will ever sit inside has no walls, no bars, no locked doors? What if it is built entirely out of waiting? Waiting for someone to finally see you. Waiting for them to acknowledge what they did. Waiting for the phone to ring, for the letter to arrive, for the moment they look you in the eyes and say, "I was wrong, I hurt you, I am sorry." And what if that moment never comes? What if the person who cracked something open inside of you is living their life right now, laughing, eating, sleeping, completely unbothered, while you are sitting in the rubble of what they left behind, holding your breath for a redemption that will never be delivered? That is where we need to start today, right there in that uncomfortable, painful, devastating truth. I have spent years sitting with data, sitting with stories, sitting with human beings who were brave enough to crack themselves open and tell me the truth about their lives. And one of the most consistent, heartbreaking patterns I have encountered is this: people are dying, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, relationally, because they have tied their healing to someone else's conscience. And here is the shattering reality that nobody wants to say out loud. Some people do not have the capacity for that kind of accountability. Some people will never say sorry, not because the harm wasn't real, not because your pain wasn't legitimate, but because owning what they did would require a level of courage, self-awareness, and emotional honesty that they simply do not possess. And that truth, God, that truth is one of the hardest things a human heart can hold. Dr. Kristen Neff, one of the most groundbreaking researchers in the field of self-compassion, has spent her career studying what happens to people when they encounter suffering and how they respond to themselves in those moments. What she found is absolutely staggering, and it directly connects to everything we are talking about today. She discovered that the vast majority of people who are carrying unresolved pain, particularly pain that was caused by someone else, are simultaneously engaged in one of two equally destructive behaviors. Either they are brutally criticizing themselves for allowing the hurt to happen, replaying the moment they trusted someone they shouldn't have, convinced that the wound is somehow evidence of their own inadequacy, or they are completely isolated in their suffering, operating under the silent, suffocating belief that nobody else has ever felt this particular brand of broken. What Dr. Neff's research revealed is that both of these responses, the self-attack and the isolation, actually neurologically amplify the pain. They send the brain into a threat response, which floods the body with cortisol, keeps the nervous system in a state of chronic activation, and makes it biologically, literally impossible to heal. The antidote she identified is not what most people expect. It is not strength. It is not resilience in the traditional sense. It is self-compassion, the radical, courageous, countercultural act of treating yourself with the same warmth, understanding, and gentleness that you would offer to someone you deeply love who is suffering. And here is what makes this finding so earth-shattering in the context of what we are discussing today. Self-compassion works regardless of whether the person who hurt you ever acknowledges the damage they caused. Your nervous system does not need their apology to begin healing. It needs yours. Now I want to talk about something that gets profoundly misunderstood, and I mean profoundly, the concept of forgiveness. Because somewhere along the way, we absorbed this completely distorted, deeply harmful narrative that forgiving someone means you are saying what they did was okay, that you are letting them off the hook, that you are opening the door for them to walk back into your life and do it all over again. And if that is what forgiveness means, then I completely understand why so many people refuse it, resist it, and feel viscerally angry when someone suggests it as a pathway to healing. But that is not what forgiveness is. That is not what the research shows. That is not what the data tells us about the people who actually manage to move through the kind of pain we are talking about today. Dr. Fred Luskin at Stanford University, and his work on this is some of the most important work being done in the intersection of psychology, health, and human resilience. spent years studying forgiveness not as a moral or religious concept, but as a measurable, documented physiological and psychological phenomenon. What he found should be in every doctor's office, every therapist's waiting room, on every refrigerator and every home where someone is quietly drowning in unresolved hurt. People who practice forgiveness, and I want you to hear this clearly, people who practice forgiveness without any contact with the person who harmed them, without any reconciliation, without any apology being offered, showed dramatically lower levels of anger, significantly reduced depression, reported less physical pain, had lower blood pressure, and experienced what Dr. Luskin describes as a profound recovery of personal agency. And that last piece is the one that stops me every single time, personal agency, the feeling that you are the author of your own life again, that your story is not being written by someone else's hands, because that is exactly what happens when we stay locked in the waiting. We hand the pen of our own narrative to the person who hurt us, and we say unconsciously, I cannot move forward until you give me permission. And most of the time, they have no idea they are even holding it. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question. What are you protecting by holding on? Because in my research, in thousands of conversations with people about shame, about vulnerability, about courage, I have learned that we almost never hold on to pain without a reason. There is almost always something underneath the holding. Sometimes it is this: releasing the hope of an apology feels like releasing the evidence that it happened. Like if you stop waiting for them to admit it, somehow it means you are agreeing that it wasn't real, that you weren't hurt, that you made it up, that the whole thing was your fault. And if you are sitting here right now nodding your head, I need you to hear me clearly. Letting go of the hope of an apology does not erase what happened. The harm was real, the violation was real, your pain is real. Letting go does not mean it didn't matter, it means you matter more. Sometimes the holding is about justice, about the deep human need, and it is a legitimate, entirely understandable need for things to be fair, for wrongdoing to have consequences, for the person who caused pain to feel some version of what they caused. And there is grief in accepting that the world does not always work that way, that sometimes people hurt other people catastrophically and face no visible consequences, that sometimes the person who deserves accountability the most is the one who receives it the least. Sitting with that grief, really sitting with it, not bypassing it, not spiritually skipping over it with platitudes about karma and what goes around comes around, but actually grieving the injustice of it is a non-negotiable part of the healing process. You cannot go around the grief, you have to go through it.
Dr. Susan David, whose work on emotional agility is some of the most important psychological contribution of the last decade, talks about what she calls emotional rigidity as one of the primary obstacles to human flourishing. And emotional rigidity is exactly what I am describing, the state of being hooked by a feeling, a thought, a story so completely that it begins to dictate every choice you make, every relationship you enter, every risk you take or refuse to take. What Dr. David found, and this is the part that I find simultaneously devastating and extraordinarily hopeful, is that the people who are most emotionally rigid are not the ones who feel too much. They are the ones who have been told, directly or indirectly, that what they feel is not allowed, that their anger is too big, that their grief is self-indulgent, that they should be over it by now, that they need to just move on.
And in response to that messaging, they have done one of two things. Either they have suppressed the emotion so completely that it has gone underground and begun poisoning them from below the surface, or they have become so fused with the emotion that they cannot see around it, cannot see past it, cannot imagine an identity that exists outside of what was done to them. Dr. David's research shows that the path through, the actual functional, evidence-based path toward emotional healing is what she calls being with the emotion, not becoming it, not running from it, sitting beside it with curiosity and compassion and saying, I see you, I understand why you are here, and I am not going to let you make all my decisions. That is not weakness. That is one of the most courageous things a human being can do. Now, I want to talk about something that people almost never connect to this conversation, and that is identity. Because here's what I have noticed, and this is both in the research and in my own life, because I am not standing here pretending I have not been in this exact conversation with my own pain. When someone hurts us in a significant way and never takes accountability for it, we often unconsciously begin to build our identity around the wound. We become the person who was betrayed, the person who was abandoned, the person who was gaslit, minimized, dismissed, abused. And for a time, for a season, That identity serves a purpose. It is the brain's way of making meaning out of something that feels completely senseless. It is how we locate ourselves in the chaos. But at some point, and only you can know when that point is, that identity stops being a life jacket and starts being an anchor. It stops keeping you above water and starts pulling you down. And the question then becomes, and God, this is the hard question, who are you without the wound? Not who were you before it. Not who would you have been if it hadn't happened. Who are you now? Today, with everything you have survived and everything you have learned and every impossible thing you have had to hold, who are you when you are not defined by what someone else did to you? Dr. Edith Eger, who survived Auschwitz at the age of 16 and went on to become one of the most extraordinary psychologists and human beings alive, says something in her work that has never left me since the first time I read it. She says, the biggest prison is in our own mind. And she says, it not from a place of dismissing the reality of external harm. This is a woman who experienced unimaginable atrocity, who watched her mother walk to the gas chamber, who was liberated from a death camp weighing 60 pounds. She says it from a place of hard-won, fire-tested wisdom about where freedom actually lives. It does not live in the hands of the person who hurt you. It does not arrive with their apology. It is built choice by choice, breath by breath, day by day, from the inside out. And nobody can give it to you, but nobody can take it from you either once you claim it. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, whose research on trauma has fundamentally changed the way we understand the human body and the human mind, spent decades studying what happens inside us when we experience harm that is never acknowledged, never validated, never named. And what he found is that the body keeps the score, that trauma, including the trauma of being hurt and never receiving acknowledgement for it, lives in the body, it lives in the nervous system. It shows up in chronic illness and sleep disruption, in difficulty with intimacy, in hypervigilance, in the way your stomach drops when you hear a particular tone of voice or see a certain look in someone's eyes. The body remembers everything the mind tries to move past. And the pathway to healing that Dr. van der Kolk identified is not intellectual. It is not talking yourself out of the pain or reframing your thoughts or adopting a more positive mindset. It is somatic, it is physical. It is learning to feel safe inside your own skin again. It is processing the experience through the body, through movement, through breath, through creative expression, through safe connection with other human beings. And here is what makes this so relevant to everything we are discussing. None of those pathways require the participation of the person who caused the harm. Your body does not need their apology to begin releasing what it has been holding. It needs presence, it needs safety, it needs you. Because ultimately, and this is where everything we have talked about today converges, healing from something that was never acknowledged by the person who caused it is an act of extraordinary self-love. And I use that phrase carefully because self-love has been so thoroughly co-opted by surface-level wellness culture that it barely means anything anymore. I am not talking about bubble baths and affirmations. I am talking about the deep root-level decision to say, I am worth healing, even without the closure, even without the apology, even without their acknowledgement of what they did. I am worth the work. My life is worth reclaiming. My capacity for joy, for connection, for trust, for love, none of that belongs to them. They do not get to keep it just because they will not say sorry. That is the most radical, most courageous, most profoundly human thing I know. And it begins with one decision. Not a feeling, because you may not feel ready. Not a certainty, because you may be full of doubt. Just a decision. The decision to stop making your freedom contingent on their conscience. The decision to pick up the pen of your own story and start writing the next chapter yourself. The decision to let the apology that will never come mean something entirely different than you thought it did. Not evidence that your pain wasn't real, but evidence that your healing was never theirs to give in the first place. It was always yours. It has always been yours. Conclusion. We began today with a question, what if the apology never comes? And we end with an answer that is both harder and more beautiful than anything we could have received from the person who hurt us. The answer is this. You heal anyway. You grieve the harm. You honor the wound. You feel every single thing you need to feel without rushing past it or pretending it away. You practice the radical, research-backed, life-changing act of self-compassion. You choose forgiveness not for them, never for them, but for the restoration of your own personal agency, your own authorship, your own freedom. You learn to feel safe in your body again. You build your identity on something deeper and more permanent than what was done to you. You decide with every breath and every choice that your life is worth more than an endless vigil for words that will never be spoken. The apology you deserved should have come. It is a genuine loss that it didn't. Grieve that loss. And then gently and with tremendous courage, set it down. You were never meant to carry it forever. You were meant for so much more than waiting.